All right, everybody, we're just going to start very shortly. Okay, thanks everyone for that, and thanks for everyone who put on morning tea. That was great. So we can be nice and refreshed for this second session. We're looking today at this second session on godly wisdom and truth, and we'll start by. I don't think there's a hymn this time, so we'll just, if you rise, we'll open with prayer. Our great eternal God, once again we come before you in thanks and praise as we consider our second study this morning on Proverbs. Help us, dear God, to open our hearts and our minds to our brother Andrew's words this day, that we might learn to love you more, to love your son more, to love our brethren and sisters, and to show all that love in our everyday lives. Thank you, Father, for your amazing blessings and for this opportunity to be together this weekend, to grow spiritually and to continually encourage each other towards that coming kingdom. It is through Jesus our Lord we ask this blessing. Amen. So we had a fantastic first study this morning, looking at the key to the book. The second one, godly wisdom and truth. I'm going to ask Brother Matt Jeffress to come forward and read that shortly, and then as soon as he's read that, I'll get Brother Andrew to continue with his second study. Thank you.
Proverbs chapter 9. Wisdom hath builded her house, she hath hewn out her 7 pillars. She hath killed her beasts, she hath mingled her wine, she hath also finished her table. She hath sent forth her maidens, she crieth upon the highest places of the city. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him, Come, eat of my bread, and drink of the wine which I have mingled. Forsake the foolish, and live, and go in the way of understanding. He that reproveth a scorner getteth to himself shame, and he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. For by me thy days shall be multiplied, and the years of thy life shall be increased. If thou be wise, thou shalt be wise for thyself, but if thou scornest, thou alone shalt bear it. A foolish woman is clamorous, she is simple and knoweth nothing. For she sitteth at the door of her house, on a seat in the high places of the city, to call passengers who go right on their ways. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. And as for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him, Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of the grave.
Thanks, Matt and Dave. Do you like making decisions? Because I don't. I don't like it at all. Very difficult, isn't it? Sometimes things happen in life and you've got to make a decision about how you're going to react and how you've got to respond. Something happens and what are you going to do? So it could be a problem arising at work. It could be some opportunity that comes up for a new job. Maybe it's someone in the ecclesia who's going down a wrong path, or maybe the whole ecclesia is going down the wrong path in your opinion. Maybe someone hurts you very badly, or they might hurt someone that you love, or you might hurt someone. Maybe someone asks you for a very big favour and you don't know how to respond. Or maybe you're beginning to spend a lot more time on a hobby or an interest in life, or maybe you're in a relationship that is not doing you any good. And suddenly life becomes very complex, doesn't it? It goes from being extremely simple in childhood. When we're kids, we've got very limited decision-making ability or authority, very limited choices anyway, and most of the decisions in life are made for us, even though we don't like it at the time. And then suddenly you get older and it all gets very complicated and the decisions are yours to make. Now, when we come to a book like Proverbs, there's 2 different ways we could look at it. If you look at it one way, you pick up a book like Proverbs and you read it and you think, well, that's a very challenging book. Because if you think of lifestyle decisions, they are easier if we just do what comes naturally to us. Okay? The results may not be the best for us, we may not make the best decisions, but the decisions themselves are very easy because we just think, well, what's going to make me feel better? What feels right to me? That's what I'll do. What would I like to do? That's what I'll do. Now that's an easy decision, irrespective of whatever results come from it. The challenge comes when we decide to try and be different to what comes naturally to us. Then that becomes a bit of a challenge. And here we've got a book with these hundreds of proverbs that challenge us to do something that doesn't come naturally to us. Right? It's a book that challenges us to be like God when we're not naturally like God. Now, doing something that's not natural to you is harder than doing something that comes naturally to you. So suddenly the book becomes quite a challenging book. Now, if we view Proverbs from that perspective, it can seem quite a daunting book. I think, like, I couldn't possibly live up to all of these things. How could I live like this? Viewed from that perspective, it makes decision making seem like it's harder and more challenging. But we can look at Proverbs from a totally different perspective. And that is, we could say, what this book does is it makes my decision making extremely easy. Very, very simple. This book can put an end to laying in bed at night and tossing and turning about whether you've made the right decision or what decision you think you should make. It can put an end to agonising over weighing up the possible consequences of doing this or doing that. It can put an end to stressing over what others might have done in this situation, what your friends or your family members are saying you should really do in this situation. It can put an end to worrying about how other people might react if I do a certain thing. What it does is it just cuts through all of that with a very, very simple message. And an example of that simple message is in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5. And Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5 tells us to trust in Yahweh with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. The word trust means to be confident, sure, bold, or secure. It's a great feeling, isn't it? It's a great feeling when you know you've made the right decision and you don't have to second guess or worry about it anymore. And the book of Proverbs can give us that great feeling. Because what that verse is telling us, isn't it, that if I lean on my own understanding, I'm leaning on something that is at best fairly unstable, and it might even fall over, and I might even get hurt. I'm putting my weight on something that is not reliable. But it says, forget about that, and simply trust in Yahweh. And the thing about that is that when we read the Proverbs in this book, what we're doing is we're not putting our trust in the Proverbs as such. What we're doing is we're putting our trust in the source of those Proverbs. If you come back to chapter 2 and verse 6, it tells us that Yahweh giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. There's our three words all packaged up together. And where do they come from? They come from God. That's the one we're putting trust in. We're putting trust in the source of those Proverbs. It is as if we've gone to God himself, and we sort of respectfully imagine this, that if we could go to God himself and say, my dear Heavenly Father, what would you do in this situation? And God answers and says, I would do this. Now, if we could actually do that, if we could actually approach God in that way and get an answer like that from God, are you going to then go to bed that night and lay in bed at night and toss and turn and think, should I make the right decision or not? Maybe I should have done this or that. Am I really being fair to myself? Am I being too lenient, or am I being too hard, or whatever, and you toss and turn and worry about that? Are you going to spend 1 minute worrying about that when you've been able to go to God and he said, well, this is what I would do. You go to bed that night and we sleep very, very peacefully indeed. And that's what we're told in chapter 3 and verse 24. It says, when thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. You couldn't get a sweeter sleep than that, could you? Then God has said, this is what you should do, and we did it, And now we don't have to worry anymore. It doesn't matter whether what we did seems unfair. It doesn't matter whether we feel as though we're just getting ripped off or we're being taken advantage of by someone. Maybe we should be a little bit harder. Maybe I should stand my ground. I have done what God has told me to, and I can go to bed at night and not worry about it anymore. And the great thing, of course, about this book is that you read a verse like chapter 3, verse 5, and it says, trust in Yahweh with all thine heart. And that, you could read that and think, well, that's a nice sentiment. It's pretty vague, though. It doesn't really... What does it actually mean? It's a fairly impractical thing. Trust in Yahweh. What does that actually mean? Because then, of course, what follows in the following pages are hundreds of very, very specific examples of what that would mean in daily life. So it takes what is a fairly, sort of high concept but a vague concept in a sense of trust in Yahweh, and it makes it very, very practical. And when we view Proverbs that way, it ceases to become a very daunting and a challenging book, and it becomes a book that can just simplify our life. It doesn't mean that what we're going to do is easy to do. It just means that the process of deciding and weighing up our options becomes very, very easy because we have absolute confidence that we have made the right decision because we didn't make the decision. See, that's the problem, isn't it? If I lean on my own understanding, was that something I should lean on or not? How stable was that? Is it going to fall over tomorrow? Or in 10 years, am I going to realise I made the wrong decision? No. We've lent on something very, very stable, and that is, of course, the wisdom of God. He's the one who's made our decisions for us. And even if, in the short term, things don't seem to go that well, and we look back and think, gee, things have gone badly since I made that decision, we don't have to worry because we've done what God told us to do. We've done what God himself would have done in that situation. Now, I'm sure that in your life you've had examples of that where you've actually done that. And I've had examples like that in my life as well. Too few, many times, much more often not doing that. But I know in my life that on occasions when I've done that, and it really goes against what you would normally think would be fair, or I'm not being fair to myself, or I should do this, or I should stand my ground on this. On those occasions where you actually make a decision that you wouldn't normally have made, I'm sure you've experienced that the moment you make that decision, it is just the greatest burden just comes off your shoulders, and it just seems so obvious what you should do, and you think, why didn't I think of that earlier? Why didn't I just realise that simple point? What would God have me do? And you make the decision, and then there's no more worry at all. You never have to worry about it. Because we never forget that moment where we made that decision and we knew it was right. And whatever circumstances come, it doesn't matter. Whatever anyone else says to us doesn't matter. Because we've followed what God told us to do. We've lent on something that is stable. So that's what I think is the blessing of godly wisdom from this book. What about the subject of truth? We often use the phrase the truth, don't we? I'm in the truth. Is she in the truth? He left the truth. We're all living our lives in the truth. And of course what we're saying is that we understand the true message of the Bible by God's blessing, and what he says is true, and we understand it, so we say that we're in the truth. And we use that phrase in that way. But if that is true, then the very least we could be is truthful people, honest and truthful people. There are lots of ways to reflect God in our life. But a first base, surely, in our lives is to be honest and truthful people. How much do you value honesty and truth in your life? How important is that to you or to me? Because as we've seen, as we know, Proverbs is about godly wisdom. It's about godly wisdom. So even if, concepts like truth and honesty, most people in the world, vast majority of people in the world would agree with that. Very few people would say, no, I'm a serial liar, and I think that's the right way to be. Just about everyone would say, yeah, honesty and truth is important. But they would say that regardless of whether they believe in God. They're probably honest people. We want to experience the quality of honesty and truth in our life because they're what God does. They are what God is. God is actually represented by that concept of honesty and truth. There's a verse we all know so well from Deuteronomy. He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a God of truth, and without iniquity, just and right is he. Now, he's a rock. You look at that rock, you know that rock's not going anywhere. If you took that photo on a holiday of that rock, and then you went back 10 years later and you found that it was 50 metres to the left of where it was, in exactly the same configuration, but it's moved, you'd be absolutely amazed. That'd be an unbelievable thing. Well, we just know that wouldn't happen. You know that rock is going to be exactly the same spot as it was when you first saw it. That is an unchanging, reliable fact. And God uses that concept to describe what he's like in relation to truth. Everything he says is true. And he knew that one day there would be a generation of his children that would live in an era where morality is just very, very flexible, truth is very blurry, and some people believe some things, some people, and most people don't even care that other people believe other things. Everyone's got their own version of truth. So we live in an area of fake news. And we're living with a thing called the internet that just absolutely feeds in and creates that situation. And God knew that one day a group of his children would live in a world and would have to struggle with that. And we're that group. So we've got to look at a verse like that and say, well, that represents absolute stability, truth and honesty. So we ought to be a people that are obsessed with the truth. Obsessed with the truth. Now, I'd like you to just come with me to Ephesians chapter 4. Have a look what the Apostle Paul said to the Ephesians about this concept of truth. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 25. He said, "Wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbour, for we are members one of another." Now, why do you think he's linked telling the truth with the fact that we are one body? Because he could have ended that verse in any way. He could have just ended it saying, "Tell the truth." But he says, "Tell the truth." Why? Well, because you are members of the same body. So if you think of the human body operates as a unit, doesn't it? The human body cooperates with itself. The various parts help the other parts to do things they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So my brain tells my arm to move my hand to that bottle and pick up the bottle, and then it tells my mouth what to do when the bottle goes down my mouth or the water goes down my mouth. The whole thing cooperates together. So the various messages that are being sent are predictable, and they are reliable, and they're helpful. So the body, in a sense, is true to itself. And above all, no part of the body goes out of its way to unnecessarily hurt another part of the body. So it's very rare that my brain would tell my hand, to pick up a hammer and bang myself over the head. In fact, I can't think that that's ever happened, and I trust it never will, because that would be counterproductive to my body. The body cooperates with itself. Why does it do that? Well, in chapter 4 of Ephesians and verse 15, Paul says, but speaking the truth in love, we grow up unto him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. So we're all connected to Christ, who is our head, and a body part only acts as it's instructed by the head. So the ideal situation is this, that when I speak to you, and say something to you, it's like when two parts of a body can rely on each other and they're helping each other. You can be absolutely sure that what I'm telling you is the truth. And when I'm speaking to someone else about you, we can be absolutely sure that I'm only saying what is true, and I'm only saying anything at all because I think it's going to help and benefit another part of the body, which in this case is you. And that's all happens because we're all connected to this head, Christ, which directs us to do those various things. Now that's the ideal, isn't it? It's ideal if it works that way. But very often we all fall well short of that ideal. Now when we think of the subject of truth, when we're considering the concept of truth, if we just think that the opposite of truth is deliberate lying, then we miss the point probably entirely. Because as I said, very few people, and hopefully none of us, actually go out of our way to tell blatant, deliberate lies. But if that's all we think when we read a proverb that, for example, tells us about being honest, if we think, well, okay, am I honest? Yeah, I don't go out of my way to tell deliberate, blatant lies. Well, that's good. That's one of the 600 that I'm doing. I can move on to the next one. If we think like that, we're missing the point of the proverb. Because we might not be truthful, honest people. I'll show you this picture of this man. This is a man called, not a happy man, admittedly, but anyway, he was a man called Samuel Johnson. And he was an English writer, and he wrote various religious writings. He died in 1784. So his name's Samuel Johnson, and another fella called Boswell wrote a book about him, and the book was called The Life of Johnson. And this is what he said. This is one little comment in this book. So he's describing a little circumstance that Samuel Johnson was in. So he says, next morning at breakfast, Johnson gave a very earnest recommendation of what he himself practiced, a strict attention to truth, even in the most minute particulars. Accustom your children, said Johnson, accustom your children constantly to this. If a thing happened at one window, and they, when relating it, say it happened at another, do not let it pass, but instantly check them. You do not know where deviation from truth will end. Our lively hostess replied, nay, this is too much. Little variations in narrative must happen 1,000 times a day if one is not perpetually watching. Johnson replied, well, madam, you ought to be perpetually watching. It is more from carelessness about truth than from intentional lying that there is so much falsehood in the world. Now that's a very important point that he's making there, isn't it? Must have been a very honest man. It's very easy to underestimate the importance of accuracy because we don't know where things can lead. And we can be fairly flippant sometimes with accuracy in what we're saying. Another thing that this Samuel Johnson said, this is later on in life, he's certainly no happier if we look at him there. And I think the other thing, it's only an aside, but I was thinking, like, there he is in his 30s, starting to lose his hair, obviously, and even though he's an absolute stickler for honesty, later on in life, he was very dishonest when it came to his hair, because that's not true. That is not true, that hair. Anyway, there he is later in life, and he made this comment. He said, great caution, here's the comment, there it is, great caution is necessary to avoid adjusting stories. Some tell what they do not know, so they won't seem ignorant, and others from mere indifference about truth. All truth is not indeed of equal importance, but if little violations are allowed, every violation will in time be thought little. That's so true, isn't it? Then not everything's of equal importance, but we don't know where things can lead. And a very good rule in life is to say nothing is going to leave my lips unless I know for sure that it is true. And this sort of thing gets... We sort of break that rule so many times in life. So many people do. You know, you walk along, you might be walking along in the street and you see a couple of ladies walk past, or men, doesn't have to be ladies, but it could be ladies, and you just hear a snippet of conversation, and you hear one of them say, "Oh, I'm pretty sure he knew how she felt, so I don't know, I think it was pretty terrible why that he said that." And that's all you hear. And you go on and you think, I wonder what that was about. I'm pretty sure he knew how she felt, so that was terrible that he said what he did. And you think, who is this guy? Maybe he didn't know how that woman felt. There's some guy sitting across in a couple of suburbs working away in a bank or something, and he's having his character crucified by these two women on the basis that she's pretty sure that he knew how she felt. And if he did know how she felt, well, maybe he shouldn't have said what he did. But she's just pretty sure that he knew, but what if he didn't know? Well, that puts an entirely different complexion on, doesn't it? But she doesn't know that. And so the conversation goes on. And of course, the conversation that goes on is far more interesting if it's just allowed to go on. If the other woman says, "Well, you don't know that he felt that way," oh, okay, so suddenly the conversation becomes very boring. What are we going to talk about now? But if we say, "Well, yeah, maybe he did feel that way," well, then we've got an interesting conversation to be had. And so it goes on. The whole thing is based on, the whole conversation was based on speculation. And God hates that sort of thing. And we do that so much in life. I remember a few years ago, I was with my brother Jack at a toy fair overseas, and there's this guy called Jerry Crown. And Jerry Crown, you might have seen board games with a brand called Crown and Andrews. It's a pretty famous brand. Anyway, he's Jerry Crown. And he's always at the toy fairs every year, and he's with this woman called Audrey. And Audrey, I don't think she's his wife, but she's his business partner. Anyway, they always see them together at the toy fairs every year. And I remember one year we went, a few years ago, and we were with this other guy, and we walked into a room and we saw Audrey. And we said, "Oh, there's Audrey." And we said, "Oh, I wonder where Jerry is." And the guy we were with said, "He's actually died." And we said, "Well, that's incredible. When did that happen?" "Oh, I'm not sure when, but yeah, he's passed away." "Oh, that's very sad. He's a really, bit of an icon in the industry. That's very sad." Anyway, then next minute in walks Jerry. And he was well and truly alive, and we were thrilled to see Jerry, and so it was a happy end to the story. But you sort of think to yourself, how did that actually happen? Like, he's obviously got sick, and then someone has said, "Jerry's sick," and then that person who's heard it has said to someone else, "Jerry's sick," and they've said to someone else, "Jerry's sick," and that person's gone to the next person and said, "Jerry's dead." So it's a very, very, there's not like a gradual thing. That's a very, very sudden transition. And that's what must have happened for that to have occurred. That has actually happened. Someone's heard he's sick and said he's dead. And the thing is, it always goes in that direction, doesn't it? It's not like someone hears that Jerry's unwell. It's not like Jerry dies, then someone hears that Jerry's dead, and they say to someone, "Jerry's dead," and they say to the next person, "Jerry's unwell." That never goes that way. And then the next person says, "Jerry's well." Well, how come we're at his funeral? he's not that well. So it's just funny the way it always sort of goes in the direction of what makes it more interesting. It's far more interesting if Jerry's dead than if he's just simply unwell. This just happens all the time. I was having a meal with Cliff Simmons. A lot of you would know Cliff, back in Melbourne a few weeks ago, and we were sitting in, it's a place called Knox City. Some of you would know that. And there's a lot of restaurants. So there was hundreds of people because everyone's madly going out to eat out because it's like a window of time when we can do that before the next lockdown. So we're all out there in these restaurants. And I was sitting there with Cliff and I said, "Look at all these people, all this conversation going on." I said, "What percentage of the millions of words that is being spoken do you reckon would actually be true?" And I had a figure in my head. Now, you just think of a figure in your head. What do you think would be, what percentage of what's being said is actually the absolute honest truth? You get a figure in your head. What do you think, Max? What are you thinking? 10%. Max has got a very black and dark view. Goodness me. Max is having a bad day. What about you, Rodney? What did you think?
I think about 40.
40%? Yeah, so, well, Cliff said 50%, I said 60%. Anyone have more than 70, 80? 70, very optimistic, very bright, sunny, optimistic view. Wrong, it's wrong. What you're saying is wrong. It's another lie. So we're just operating on lies. We're reacting to people, we're learning about what people are doing, we're forming opinions about what other people are doing based on, there's a at best like 50-50 chance or something like that it's all actually either false or true. It's amazing that we can actually, conduct life in that way. Now, we come to a book like Proverbs, and it tells us that God is truth. And God is a God of truth because he hates what's false. Now, you come with me to Proverbs chapter 6. These are very familiar words to us. In Proverbs chapter 6. So in Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 16 we read, wrong page, Proverbs 6 verse 16, these 6 things doth Yahweh hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him, a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. Verse 16 says these are things that God hates. The word in the Hebrew for abomination in verse 16, is a word which it means disgusting, abhorrent, or detestable. Now, if I asked you, what sins do you find disgusting, abhorrent and detestable? What really, really annoys you and just makes you feel sick to think that that's going on? Would it be little untruths that occur amongst us? I think for probably many of us, there'd be different type of sins that would fall into that category. But this is a list of what God finds absolutely disgusting. And in that list, 2 of the 7 relate to this practice of inaccurate and dishonest talk. Verse 17 says he hates a lying tongue. The Hebrew word means a sham. We said something is true, but it's false. So the whole thing's a sham. In verse 19, he hates a false witness that speaks lies. A witness means to testify or to record. So if we put verse 17 and 19 together, it seems to be referring both to sort of inaccurate talk in verse 17 and deliberate lying in verse 19, deliberate deceit, like a witness giving false testimony about something. And both of those things are disgusting to God. He hates them. And we need to take this sort of thing very, very seriously. Because we view certain type of sins as particularly abhorrent or damaging, and rightly so. And certain things happen in ecclesial life and the whole place is scandalised by it. And it's terrible, and we never forget it. And we remember it for many, many years to come. But we often give a very casual pass to the sort of dishonesty and inaccuracy that God absolutely hates. And of course, it doesn't even have to be spoken. It could be something that we just think. It goes unspoken, but it's still false. So I might think to myself, I wonder why I don't see James talking to Mason very often. I wonder why that is. I think maybe he sort of feels a bit intimidated by him. I mean, Mason's a pretty good-looking guy, and he's active and fairly talented. James not so much, on all counts. But I think he might be a little bit He might be a little bit jealous of him, actually. I reckon that's why they're not speaking to him, why they're not talking, why he's not talking to him. And that whole thing is not even true. It's all, I think perhaps perhaps James is jealous of Mason. He might feel a little bit intimidated by him. I think that Mason is a little bit more talented than James, and that's why he feels that way, and maybe that's why he's not talking to him. So the whole thing is perhaps, maybe, I think this way, that could be the case, and I've reached a conclusion that I've gone way off what's true in my own mind, based on a whole lot of little moments in my mind, like the way my mind has gone. It's gone that way, that way, that way, and that way, and I'm over here, and the truth is right over here, and I've just made a series of wrong decisions based on my own speculation, based on nothing. And the whole result is dishonest. And it's, even if it's unspoken, God hates that sort of thing. But when it's then spoken, that's when it really kicks in. Because look, verse 19 says, a false witness that speaks lies. The word in the Hebrew means to puff or fan or kindle. So I've got this false idea in my mind, totally wrong, about the relationship between James and Mace, and not only is it in my mind now, I've blown on it, and blown it and fanned it, and now it's away it goes. Now other people think the same thing, and now they're adding to it. It's becoming more and more interesting as this proceeds through the group. And God just hates that sort of thing. He just finds that absolutely disgusting. It's interesting, isn't it, that in our legal system they say, you know, when someone gets up in court and they say, I've got to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that's, when you think about it, that's very well crafted, that statement. Because I could tell the truth, but leave out things, and I could tell the truth, but be mixed with some lies. And I could still say I'm telling the truth. But if I say I'm telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that leaves me no room for any deviation at all from completely what is true. And that's what we've got to be like. Just come with me to Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 1. Proverbs chapter 11 verse 1 says, a false balance is abomination to Yahweh, but a just weight is his delight. So there's our word abomination again. It's the same word. It's disgusting. And it says what God finds disgusting is a false balance. In the Hebrew it means craft, deception or guile. So this is quite a deliberate dishonesty, isn't it? But not only is God disgusted by that, we could sort of expect that, but what that verse tells us is that the opposite of that delights him. It actually delights him. And it's not as if, so you think, well, gee, that's good. What actually delights God? What could I do to delight God? It's not something particularly onerous that delights God, that we've got to do. It's not something particularly elaborate. It is simply telling the truth. God's not asking us to take those scales and adjust them in favour of my customer. If they were my scales and I'm a businessman, he's not asking me to adjust them in favour of my customer. He's just simply asking me to tell the truth. Do what's fair for him and fair for me, and be honest about it. And that proverb tells us that actually puts a smile on God's face. That actually delights God. So when we stick rigidly to the truth in what we think of people and what we say about people and how we treat people, we are causing God to feel the emotion of joy. The God of heaven and the earth feels the emotion of joy when we do something simple like that. What a simple thing to do. What a simple rule to adopt in our life to give joy to God. We love to think that we could give joy to God. We think, what great thing could I do to make God happy? What a mountain to climb. But I haven't got the talent to do it. I haven't got the time to do it. All these things we say. And that proverb tells us, you just be honest. Just tell the truth all the time, and that will make God very, very happy. It could perhaps be the single greatest rule that we could adopt in our life. And one final point on truth before we move on from that. When you look at Proverbs 11 verse 1, you think, well, why is a just weight such a delight to God? Why does that give him so much joy? You'd think, doesn't he need more than that to make him happy? Well, if you come over to Proverbs 16 verse 11, we have the answer to that question. This is why it's so important to God. Proverbs 16 verse 11 says, "A just weight and balance are Yahweh's. All the weights of the bag are his work." So they are God's weights and balances. So the issue of truth and honesty and accuracy isn't just an issue of fair trading amongst people. It is far, far bigger than that, because God actually is truth. Not only is he truthful, it's not something he does, he actually is truth. And when we say and think true things, we are, in effect, endorsing and we're applauding what God is. And that's like a little bit of God on the earth in our lives. Amazing to think that, isn't it? Proverbs 12 verse 17 says, "He that speaketh truth showeth forth righteousness." We'd love to think we could show forth some sort of righteousness in our life. Well, that's a very, very simple way to do it. And it works. It actually does make God happy. But that's why it's such an offence to God when we take the truth that he has created and we change it, whether it's deliberate or careless or flippant or whatever it is. What we are doing is changing God, because God is truth. Those weights and scales are his. They are him. We are taking God and we are distorting God as a being when we don't tell the truth. And that's what it means, isn't it, to put God into the Proverbs? Because an atheist could read these verses and say, well, yeah, of course, I'm an honest person. I don't tell deliberate lies. And that may well be true. Good on him if he does. But he's not doing that to endorse or reflect God. We want to be truthful because God is truth. And that anything less than the truth is a denial of the very existence of God. Now, before we finish, let's just, in a few minutes, cover 9 chapters of Proverbs, and we will just do this extremely quickly, because that'll set us up from tomorrow and the rest of the weekend as we look at some themes from the second part of the book. So Proverbs chapters 1 to 9, what are they all about? Well, that, in summary, is what they're about. They're about wisdom, as we said earlier. They describe what wisdom is, where it comes from God, how we can get it and keep it, and what it can do in our life. And as I think I said earlier as well, that the importance of that section is that puts God into the second part of the book. Because the second part of the book is all about that wisdom in daily life, and it's wisdom from God. So we've got to have God, always God, in every single proverb, and that's because the basis is a quality, a concept that comes from God, and it's who he is. Now, what is the structure of Proverbs 1 to 9? When I put up this next slide, don't let your eyes glaze over and just think, oh, no, really? Do we have to do this? Because I'm not even going to go through all of the details at all. But that is the structure of chapter 9. So just don't bother really reading those words unless you want to, unless you're very quick. So we've got a prologue, which we've looked at, and we've got an epilogue at the end. So that's those 2 bookends there. And we've got a series of 10 lectures. And they're like lectures that a father gives to his son on various different subjects. They're a series of lectures that he gives. And then there's these 2 interludes in blue where wisdom is personified. They're very poetic, where wisdom is described as a person saying things and calling to us and telling what it actually is, what it's all about. And then we've got that little appendix in the middle. So that really is the structure of it. But one of the interesting things you find, and you might have found this as you read through the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, is the fact that there's this emphasis on women, about 2 particular women in that section. So that's not come up all that well, but these lines here that are highlighted a little bit, they are parts of those 9 chapters where they're all about women, and they create this imaginary woman and describe that as having certain qualities. In fact, if you look at the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, over 50% of them are about these women. So we've got wisdom described as a woman, and we've got wisdom versus a different type of woman, a very different type of woman, a wrong type of woman. Now, why would that structure be there? Because it's very noticeable when you read through that it is there. And I think that the answer to that is that in the section, what you find is the repeated phrase, my son. So these 9 chapters are sort of set in the image of that, of a father, in this case a king, giving advice to his son. Of those 10 lectures, 8 of them start with my son. So that's the context in which Proverbs is sort of couched. That it's a royal court, and the king has the responsibility of giving advice to his son as it prepares for one day his son will be the king. Now, it could be in a house, couldn't it? A father gives advice to his son because one day he's going to be the leader of that house on a smaller scale. That's the context in which these first 9 chapters are written. Now, that clearly doesn't mean that Proverbs is irrelevant to women, because on a couple of occasions in chapter 1, in chapter 8, it says, forsake not the law of thy mother. So she must have also acquired wisdom as well. So it's not just, a book by men, for men, and women need not show any interest. It's not that at all. And yet we do have that quite stunning proportion where over half of it is about these women. And I think that the reason for that is, if you think of that king advising his son, what's he saying to his son? He wants his son to grow up well and to develop into a godly man. And that king knows, when he looks at his son, that one of the greatest problems that son's going to face, one of the greatest kinds of challenges he's going to face, is the attraction of sin of any kind. And of all the different kinds of sin that are going to beset him, one of the biggest areas of potential disaster in his life is going to be his attraction to women. Now, there's nothing wrong with that attraction, obviously, which was created by God. But if it's handled badly, people can destroy their lives over it, and they do. People lose everything. They lose their careers, they lose their families, they finish up in jail sometimes because of that problem. And ironically, Solomon fell foul of that problem himself, and so did David, of course, as we know. So, in describing the value of wisdom and what it can do for us, what better way than to pit wisdom against one of the greatest minefields in life? And that's what I think it's doing. It's taking a great quality and a powerful quality, and it's pitting it against a formidable foe that this young man is going to face. And very cleverly and very poetically, wisdom itself is described as a woman. So the Proverbs take a strong woman with the power to destroy that son's life if he lets it, and the father says that there's an even stronger woman who can defeat that other woman and protect you against her. And that's the woman that I call wisdom. So Proverbs is obviously not just a book for men, and nor is it a book about the attraction between men and women. It was simply couched in that way as the advice of a king to his son. And that son represents every one of us here, men and women, and the advice that he gives represents every type of problem we can face in life. And we've all got different problems, and for many, most of us, we've got certain problems in our life that just seem so monumental and so insurmountable, and we've battled them for decades and decades and nothing changes, and we think, am I ever going to beat this problem? Or am I just going to go through to the judgment or my death, and let's just hope for the best at the judgment, because I never ever beat it. We've all got those things in our life, and that's what this book addresses. Now, just on the structure as we finish, you can see down the bottom there's an epilogue, which was read earlier by Matt. This epilogue in chapter 9. And what it is a very dramatic picture of two invitations from two different types of women. We've got our two different women, and they both put their proposals to us. They're two different women and two very different functions that we are invited to attend. The second one in that chapter would look something like that. You can hardly see it up there, and that's probably very appropriate. It's a very, very seedy, rough, shoddily prepared event, which appears from the outside to be very attractive and a bit of fun, a lot of fun people there. But the Proverbs tells us in the end of chapter 9, it's a room full of rotting corpses. And then we read of a second invitation in verse 1 and 2. Wisdom hath builded her house, she hath hewn her 7 pillars, she hath killed her beasts, she has mingled her wine, she has furnished her table. A very, very different event is presented to which we are invited. It's a very carefully prepared event, a beautifully set out banquet. And that banquet is what we read in Proverbs 10 to 31. That's the last thing we read before we launch into the banquet itself. We are invited to attend a banquet. And when we get to the banquet, we find that we have just got page after page after page of beautifully prepared courses, full of variety and full of interest. And it would take a lifetime for us to partake of that beautiful banquet. But it's going to be our privilege over the rest of the weekend to sample some of the delights, just a few of the delights of what this wonderful woman called Wisdom has laid out for us on her magnificent table.
Well, thanks very much, Brother Andrew, for your second study. Very thought-provoking study for us all. He's really shown us the importance of trusting God 100%. He can really give us a lot of peace of mind and clarity of mind and just better decisions making by knowing that God is 100% honest, which is something that we've seen how important it is for us to be in our lives. So thanks, Brother Andrew, for that. Look forward to the third study coming up tomorrow, I believe. Now, I believe that lunch is at 12:30. And Uncle Pip has asked me to ask some of the young fellas, or just anyone really, who can help set some tables up after the study, please. So and Uncle Pip will give you some instructions on that. So we'll close our session now with the camp hymn. Thanks, Auntie Ruth, which will be on the screen, I believe. So we'll do that, followed by prayer through our brother Jesse.
Amen. our loving God, we come before you now with joy in our hearts, in awe of you, your wisdom and your understanding. We come to you, putting our entire trust in you, forsaking our own understanding, for we acknowledge that in all ways you direct our paths. We know that we have no wisdom of our own. We've been reminded this morning that it is you who gives wisdom, and out of your mouth comes understanding. Help us to reflect you in our lives, demonstrating the values of honesty and truth. Bless our conversations this weekend. Help us to speak truth to one another so that we may build each other up as we are all part of that one body whose head is Christ. We leave our time now in your care, thankful for all that you continue to do for us daily and for this time that we have to spend together as an ecclesia, learning about your word. We ask all these things through your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.